All right, we are live, and thanks as we ironed out some technical difficulties. I'm Suzanne Caldera with Shamrock Financial. I'm one of the vice presidents here and also a loan officer. And to my left, or to the screens, well, actually it is to my left, or to my right, is Karen Bacon, who's a certified financial planner with Diversified Resources in Warwick. And then I also have Joe Luca from RE/MAX, who's also the president of the Rhode Island Association of Realtors. And the purpose of this webinar today is to really help people out, seniors, maybe family members, who are wondering what should be done when you're in that transitional stage, or if you're thinking about going into that transitional stage. And more than likely, it might be a downsize situation. So I'm going to turn to Karen and ask some questions of, typically what you may see for clients in maybe the value of the home that they have, how it can be used as an asset, and then I'll turn to Joe, and Joe is going to talk about how that asset can be used, and maybe some tips for seniors on what are some of the best things for you to do to either get your home ready, or maybe stay in the home a little bit longer if it turns out that that's something that somebody wants to do, and what you should be looking for in a financial planner as well as a real estate agent. So I'm also cheating, looking at my notes. Have jeans on because we are expecting some snow, and we'll see what happens with the snow. So Karen, I know at retirement, equity in the family home is usually the most considerable part of a client or a person's wealth. And can you talk about that just a little bit about, when somebody is, maybe winding down at 62 or 65, or even some people that are still working in their 70s, what you've seen that are some of their big financial risks or hurdles.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I do as a financial planner is we look to have an objective of having a mortgage paid off or almost paid off by retirement, so that your living expenses are much less. And so therefore people have, significant equity typically in their home at retirement. And often they really want to pass that equity on to their children at some point after they pass or after both of them pass. But the biggest risk that we all have financially is really our need for long-term health care services. And that is just very, very costly. And there are simply 3 ways to pay for it: personally, from your income and your assets, or you transfer the risk to an insurance company, or publicly, which is through Medicaid. And we all have significant probability of needing that care. The statistics are that 67% of those in their 60s will need some type of long-term care services in the future. And usually it's a continuum of care, where first it starts off at home health care, where people come into the home and assist, and that could be caregivers from their family or informal caregivers as well, giving that support. And then it typically progresses from home health services to assisted living to adult daycare, and then to a nursing home. And that's all very expensive. The cost of care in Rhode Island in 2017, on average for a semi-private room, is $8,500 a month. 20 years from now, in 2037, is projected to be $15,000 a month. And I also looked at Florida, because many of our clients in Rhode Island, we know a lot of snowbirds that travel down there, and that's not really that significantly less. It's about $8,000 instead of $8,500 a month today, and a little bit less in 20 years from now. So we all have to face, the high probability of needing that care. How is that going to be covered, and what is the impact on our home and our home equity? And also too, as we age, and this is something I'm sure Joe will address, is the home appropriate to deliver those services? And as you get older, is it easy to maneuver? We talk a lot about a 1-level home instead of a 2-family home, or could you bring a bedroom down to the first floor, for example? Are the doorways wide enough? If you needed a walker or a wheelchair in the future, for example. So there's certainly financial considerations to your house going forward, but then of course physical as well.
Now, I know we primarily expected that maybe we may have some people on the webinar that may be a little bit older and may be having those transitions, but what about for some of the viewers that may be younger and maybe family members? What do you suggest are some good tips for them in preparing for, I know you love that saying, a failure to plan is a plan to fail. Like, what are some of the tips that you'd give somebody in their 30s or 40s to either help themselves or maybe prepare for their family members?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I find, generally speaking, that the older generation, the great generation, those in their 70s and 80s and 90s now, tend to hold things close to the vest. They want their kids to do their own thing. They don't really want to share their information, so to speak. And they just want their kids to think, okay, mom and dad are okay. I don't have to worry about them. So what I encourage younger people to do is engage their parents. As a matter of fact, if you Google Rob Lowe, he actually just put out a terrific article, which is kind of like Rob Lowe, interesting, about this very topic, that you need to really have these discussions with your parents and grandparents as to what is their financial stability, have they done estate planning, how are things titled, where are things? I think that one of the worst things I see is when a person passes away and a spouse or a son or daughter has no idea where anything is. And we really have to go through, tons and tons of paperwork and uncover where the assets are. But more than that, it's, if your desire is to make sure that things are passed easily to the next generation, you really have to have that discussion and that knowledge. And so even though they may not want to communicate perhaps directly to the person, to their son or daughter or grandchildren, that's where I, as a financial planner, can act as an objective, third party. And as long as somebody knows the information and make sure that all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted, that goes a long way.
That's smart. And now when you're dealing in a situation where, maybe you have somebody that's transitioning and needing to go into a home for care, do you find that, or is it in a depends situation? Are the family members involved in some of those decisions?
It does depend. Many times the family members, usually it's not something that happens all of a sudden, okay? So they see their parents starting to decline. So they start to get a little bit more engaged and start asking those questions, where the documents are and what type of coverages they have, if it's insurance coverages or not. And then at some point, it's like, okay, we need to do something. So, they start going through all of the, furniture and all the personal items and, getting rid of that, minimizing that, so that when the time does come that they move into assisted living, or if it's a single, parent or grandparent, they go to a nursing home, it's easy to just finish everything up and get the home listed. What I try to do with all of my clients is I try to get them to think about the business of buying and selling a home more like a game of chess than a game of checkers, where you're not just doing one move at a time. You want to try and plan 2, 3, 4 steps ahead, because it'll make it easier when the time comes that you have to do something. And also, many times, if you start planning ahead, you can extract more value from the transaction at the time, whenever that is, if you're buying or selling. A little bit of homework, fail to prepare, prepare to fail. Yeah. It's very true. And if I'm working with, the largest group of home buyers are in that age bracket of 30 to 34, the millennials. And I try to talk to them about, when you're buying a home, that's where you make your money, when you buy real estate. So if you can buy something that has enough bedrooms, that maybe has a first floor master bedroom, so either you, as you age, can move in there, or your parents or grandparents can move in with you, that adds value to your home. It also makes that time of transition easier whenever it comes,
Absolutely. And I think another good point, too, is that, our home is where the heart is, and where we, raise kids, and, there's a lot of emotional ties to the house. I look at it financially and the equity, but it's often very difficult for somebody to downsize and right. to separate that. And, and as it relates to estate planning and making sure that your loved ones receive what you've accumulated in wealth throughout the years. You know, a lot of times the investment part of it is pretty direct. You know, it has beneficiaries, or it's in a trust that's going to go to beneficiaries, but it's your personal belongings, the contents of the house.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, the table that you all sat around, or mom's pearls, for example, that really people have sentimental value attached. And so I really try to, again, encourage people to have those discussions beforehand, because if that's not clearly stated in an estate plan what those bequests will be, then often what I see is that there's a lot of debate and bickering and even fighting among siblings for who gets what. And that's certainly not what, you know, parents intended.
Right.
You know, so it's important. So I've even had clients go as far as putting, you know, colored dots that you buy at CVS behind, you know, pictures and underneath items in their home, and that, you know, the yellow dot is Joe and the pink dot is Karen, or what have you. So,
and that's very effective. I sold my great uncle's house a couple of years ago, and he lived to be 106. So his kids are all in there, well into their 70s. And he did that. I mean, they had all little stickers on each little, you know, tchotchke trinket and piece of furniture. So everybody knew what they were getting when the time came.
Yeah.
You know? And
that it just prevents any bickering. And then it's just really more, it's just about creating that legacy too, and having that, you know, emotional connection still through things, you know, of parents and grandparents.
And I think there's also a benefit of, you know, when somebody is working with professionals like you two, that they're getting the right type of advice, as opposed to, you know, as the market gets better, I'm sure you're seeing it in our market where, you know, people think, oh, I can just do this, you know, myself. And sometimes those, I love that you use the word tchotchke, sometimes those things have such emotional meaning, and you know, maybe you're attempting to sell the home yourself, and, you know, you get that young person that comes in and they're like, well, what is all this stuff?
Right.
And I think having someone that can be objective and can sit with the client and give them the guidance on, okay, you know, these are the best things to do to maximize what that particular value is. Or if it turns out that maybe they can stay in the house and just widen the doors, like you had mentioned. I know that you carry a special designation that we were talking about prior to starting this, that helps you to understand what the seniors are, you know, are dealing with. That designation. Right.
One of the National Association of Realtors has lots of areas of specialization that you can take classes in and receive the designation, and one is for seniors. And you know, one of the things that we can do as a realtor when you're sitting down with a family member, whether you're a senior or not, you need to, a lot of times, cull out a lot of the items in your house so it looks more presentable. So instead of having, like at my house, all of your bookshelves full of books, you want to have a minimal number of items on there. And what that can do for seniors is it can start that whole process that makes it easier in the long run, because it's like, okay, we've got these items, we want to get rid of them, we don't want to break them, we don't want to, you know, give them away. Who wants it? And that helps you know, the homeowner, and it helps the family to kind of move that whole process along.
Yeah. And have you found that, you know, as you're dealing with your clients that are moving into assisted living, that, and I guess maybe it is it depends answer, but do you find that many times they are holding on to the house and using the house to help pay for that care, or are you finding that it makes more sense for them to maybe sell the house?
Excuse me, it's definitely a case-by-case basis, but typically people want to maintain the wealth in their house, and they pay for assisted living through their income and other assets. You know, the Medicaid is another big issue that we all face, and Medicaid actually pays for 40% of all long-term care expenses throughout the country. And I'm so sorry, I keep coughing, I'm fighting this cold. But so it's important to recognize how your home is titled and how that will affect your ability to qualify for Medicaid, if that is what you're interested in doing. Or, you know, you have to certainly look at your income and assets and determine whether or not you're even, remotely eligible to qualify for Medicaid. Because, for example, sometimes people with higher income or many assets, it's a long shot. That is going to take a long time to qualify for Medicaid. Because put simply, Medicaid is really a program, federal program, but administered by each state. But you have to really illustrate that you're destitute, that you have no assets, and that's the purpose of that program. And so there are certain requirements financially as well as physically in order to qualify for it. And so sometimes people try their best to make themselves look poor on paper, so to speak, with the purpose of trying to qualify for Medicaid. And one of the ways they do that is to put a child's name on the house, or to remove their name and to gift the house to a child. And so that's certainly a strategy, but there's pros and cons. And there's really so many different ways to title your house, between a life estate deed, a revocable trust, a Medicaid asset protection trust, or an irrevocable trust, joint ownership with a spouse or with a child, for example. And they all have differences with how Medicaid looks at that, whether or not that's considered a gift, whether or not that disqualifies you from Medicaid, whether or not the recipient of the home receives a step up in basis for taxes at death, and whether or not Medicaid has the ability to put a lien against the house after you pass away. So it's definitely, kind of a complex area that I worked in combination with estate attorneys to make sure that each person has the right solution.
And I think, that hits the nail on the head of getting that plan together and then knowing and being prepared. And when you say that Medicaid will pay 40%, is it 40%? When you were saying earlier, this is $8,500 or that place is $12,500, 40% of what? What do they deem?
So actually what that means is 40% of all long-term care costs in the United States is covered by Medicaid, and about 10% is through long-term care insurance, and the rest is from privately paying. And so let's say, let's take an example to illustrate. Let's say a married couple, and the husband has $60,000 of income, and the wife has $40,000 of income, just to keep the math simple here. And the husband needs long-term care, and he goes into a facility. His $60,000 of income is going to go towards that cost of care before Medicaid even thinks about paying the difference. And then, but then let's say that's not going to be enough, because the cost of care is $120,000, $10,000 a month, $120,000 a year. So we have to come up with another $60,000 in this example. So then they look at what your countable assets are. So there's an income and then assets. And your countable assets include really just about anything: second homes, vacation properties, all of your non-retirement accounts. Your retirement accounts, if you're taking out regular withdrawals, those withdrawals will go towards your income. But with the home, if it's titled as a joint with your spouse, then that's not a countable asset. If you put it into a revocable trust, which many people do with the intent of avoiding probate eventually after the second death, then it makes it a countable asset. So then you have to remove it from the trust in order to qualify more quickly for Medicaid. So there's kind of a lot of
moving parts.
In traps, so to speak.
Yeah.
So in that example with that couple, they would have to spend their assets at a rate of $60,000 a year for the care of the husband. And in Rhode Island, they allow a married couple to keep 1/2 of their countable assets, but no more than $123,000. So if they have 150,000, they have to spend down 75 of their countable assets. So one of the techniques we use in financial planning is we think about what are your countable assets and how can we make them non-countable. And if the home is non-countable, one of the techniques we use, if there's a mortgage or if there's work that needs to be done on the home, is that we take, an asset that would have been spent for your care, let's say, $50,000 in a bank account, and would have been gone towards the nursing home, and we use it to pay off a mortgage, or we use it to buy new windows, or to replace the roof, or to improve the value of the home. And because the home, if it's owned in your name or in the name joint ownership of the spouse, is not a countable asset, it's your primary residence. And then there are other items that are not countable as well. So it's kind of a big area of planning for sure, and it's definitely something that is, I interact a lot with estate attorneys to make sure the right documents are created. And all that good stuff.
Yeah, no, that's quite a bit.
I was going to say, that's one thing that if anyone has questions about that and, the deed on your property, titling, things like that, you would want to speak with an attorney who's experienced in that specific aspect of the law, because there are many different ways that you can structure things, and everyone's situation is different. Whether you have, certain amounts of wealth or, an exponent of that amount of wealth may determine what you should do. So just don't try and do it on your own.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've been in situations as a realtor where we're looking at a house with a client, and family members tried to do something on their own, thought they could pull a fast one against the government, and it doesn't always work out that way, and you have to be careful because it's very easy to run afoul of the law.
Absolutely.
It is, and I think it's also important to align yourselves with professionals that can help you through what you're going through. And
Right.
I think for the viewers that are on here, if you're in the latter stages or the back nine of your life, you just want to make certain that you have the right professionals. And I think with real estate agents, as the market becomes better, and I think you and I have spoken about how it's so important to make sure that you're aligning with someone that this is what they're doing full time. What are their designations? Right. What are their reviews? And do they have that team where you could, you could, using you as an example, Joe, where you could speak to Joe and say, okay, well, who are estate attorneys or financial planners or people that I ought to be aligned with? And what do I need to do to get the most for the house? Because here's what my chess piece is, so to speak, right. or what my next move or second or third move is going to be. I like your chess example that you used. As you can tell, I'm not a chess player. I'm more of a checkers player. It's a little easier for me. But to talk to you on for someone that may be on the webinar and is thinking of selling their home, what do you find? Let's take that couple that's been in the house for 40 or 50 years. What do you find that are some of the things that maybe will help them maximize their value?
A lot of times, minor updating. If you have a house that was, let's say, built in the 1960s, and you've lived there a long time, and you're comfortable in your house, and you haven't had reason to change the kitchen cabinets, or you keep putting down carpet because you've always had carpet down, but underneath those carpets are beautiful hardwood floors. That's something that's not an expensive repair or an expensive update, but it makes a lot of sense, and it will add value to the house. But more importantly, it will make a house that has hardwood floors, and you compare it to the exact same house that has carpet on those hardwood floors. The one with the hardwood floors will sell more quickly for a number of reasons. One, it's more attractive upon first glance. Two, you have folks that have allergies that cannot deal with carpets. Three, there may be some odors from the carpets being there that would turn people off. There are just a lot of reasons, from hygienic to aesthetic, why people like houses that have hardwood floors. So something like that is what we would talk about in the beginning. That's why I try to, tell everyone, talk to a realtor, a full-time experienced realtor, like myself or any of my colleagues, and we will point you in the right direction and give you some suggestions. And these are answers to questions, and the answers are free, and it could save you substantial money or add value to your transaction later on.
And then, do you have tips for maybe seniors that want to stay a little bit longer? Like, what are some of those things that maybe they could do to the house
there are things that you can do. There's a whole concept called aging in place, all right? So if you wanted to do things so you could stay in your house longer and you're starting to have, problems with hips and knees and things like that, try to move everything to the first floor. Maybe have lower countertops in the bathrooms, things like that, so you can stay in your home longer. And these are things that will update the house as well as make it more livable for you. One of the things, if you have a parent or a relative that is that's older and maybe at the point where they can't live on their own anymore, but they don't need to move to assisted living or a nursing home. In the state of Rhode Island, the Rhode Island Association of Realtors, we lobbied and had passed into law what's called the accessory dwelling unit legislation. And this allows homeowners to modify their home so that there is an in-law, that's what an accessory dwelling unit is, regardless of what the local zoning codes are. This is at the state level, so it supersedes local code. And it stays with the homeowner, not with the house. So if homeowner A does it, parents move in, they pass on, they go to sell the house, the buyer does not have a home with an in-law apartment. They're buying a single-family home that has an additional bedroom and whatever else was added on. The reason for that is because if that designation went with the house, it could adversely impact neighboring homes, or it could be used as a rental. So now you have a multi-family home in the middle of a single-family neighborhood, which is problematic for everyone else who has a single-family home.
That's great. When did that get passed?
2 years ago.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That I didn't know
So
about.
it's great. That's another thing. So if you have folks, they're in their 30s or their 40s, and one of the reasons we did this is because many times seniors will move to Florida for the warmer weather. Well, a husband and wife move to Florida, one of them passes away. Now the other one has to come back. Well, where are they going to live? It doesn't make sense for them to live on their own. They want to move in with the kids. So, okay, we need to make certain accommodations. And they were having problems, the consumers were, that the local codes, building codes, wasn't allowing it. So this really, addresses that issue and makes it easier for everyone. So you can add value to your home and you can have your family live with you. So it's really a great option.
So how do they have to submit some type of plan for the house?
Well, I mean, what you would do is if you're working with a contract, you have to go out and get your building permit and everything, and everybody is aware that there is this legislation out there, so that you can do that. Whereas before, if you were in the town of Cumberland and you wanted to put an addition on, it couldn't exceed, 900 square feet or whatever the square footage was. Now, if it needs to be a little bit bigger or configured a little bit differently, regardless of what's going on, you can have that as long as you demonstrate that it's a family member.
So I think that's a good thing if we have anyone that's listening that has a family member who's getting older, who's still somewhat sufficient on their own, but doesn't need necessarily to go into a home. And
actually, it doesn't even have to be a senior. If you have a relative who's young and has some other type of disability, you can utilize that as well for the accessory dwelling unit legislation.
I'm going to cheat here and take a look at my notes on some of the items that we spoke about. And obviously, we talked about gifting and what that, how that can impact someone, and it would depend, if they did put the child on the deed. Do you see that a lot where you're pulling a deed and you see, you've got the son and the mother and...
Yeah, you do see it. And it can be, sometimes it can be problematic, especially if one of the children lives, far away. Or like in the case of my personal case with my great uncle who was 106 and his kids are in their late 70s, they're not really well versed in signing documents digitally. So now it makes it problematic when they're, a plane ride away. So.
And when somebody passes, I'm sorry.
Oh, I would say also too that, it's important to remember that when you add a child, for example, to your deed, they own your house just as much as you own your house.
Yeah.
So if they're going through any difficulties in their life with creditors or anything, it's an issue. They own the house. And also there's a difference when you inherit a property because when your name is added to a deed, it was actually gifted to you. You received a gift of equity. And so therefore you and also inherit what your parent paid for the property. So let's say if a person purchased a house, 30 years ago for $75,000, and now the home is worth $250,000 or $200,000, and the person passes away, and you are on the deed as a joint owner, so now you own it 100%, and then you turn around and sell it. If that wasn't your primary residence, and you don't get that exclusion, you also don't get what's called the step-up in basis, and so you have to pay capital gains tax on the profit from $75,000 because you inherited what your parent paid for it to the sale price of $200,000. So, you know, there's implications of putting a child's name on the deed beyond just, you know, the simplicity of it, and so it's definitely something that case-by-case basis you have to consider.
Yeah, worth consulting with a professional like, you know, an attorney who specializes in that area.
It's true, yes. I actually had a conversation with a CPA that we know via email about cost basis. I have a client in Connecticut that's considering doing that. And I said, okay, check for the CPA, and you have to understand what that means as far as your cost basis.
Right.
And I know from our end, or from my end, I should say, with seniors, there are times where maybe all the planning wasn't done perfectly, and we have to help them take out a mortgage. Interestingly, and I get this question asked a lot when I'm helping someone that's in their 60s or 70s get a mortgage, and that is, we can't discriminate. So there is no age discrimination. You can take out a 30-year loan. Yes, you're probably not going to outlive your mortgage, but if you are, awesome. If you're going to be like Joe's uncle, or great uncle, I should say. So, you know, that is an option. And
reverse
sometimes
mortgages.
Correct,
I
yes.
get that question a lot too.
Yes, and sometimes that allows the person the dignity to stay in their home.
Yep.
It's a costly program because it's an insured mortgage. It has what's called negative amortization, so I'm going to keep it simple in the sense, you know, let's say, for instance, you took out $100,000, and it gives you a few different options of either maybe taking some money out or just being able to live in the house. You are required to continue paying your taxes and your insurance. The balance will go up, but the mortgages are what's called non-recourse. So if a family member is inheriting the house, and let's just say that the balance went up to $300,000 and the house is really only worth $200,000, when it's a reverse mortgage, the no recourse means that they're not going to come after the family members and say, hey, you owe X amount of dollars because, you know, your dead father owed more than what the house was worth. So that's what they mean by a non-recourse mortgage. What I have found sometimes with family members, I'm not licensed to do them in the office. We have someone that is. But when I have had conversations saying, hey, I think you need to speak to my colleague about this, is sometimes family members wanting to step in and, you know, I don't know if they're thinking of, you know, what's going to happen when mom or dad passes and now we're not going to get as much. And I saw an ad a while back in a magazine that said, hey, your parents are not, or your in-laws are not your financial plan. I believe that. I mean, I think that, you know, your family takes care of you for a certain amount of time. Maybe it's till you're 18, or maybe you were really lucky and they paid for college. But after that, I think as children, step back. You know, they want to think. I'm sure you do.
Yeah, right.
So I'm trying to think without speak without getting too crass here of, you know, adult children feeling entitled to what's their due. And you know, and I think, you know, when you see a parent work so hard, maybe they didn't do the best planning, if that is their only asset, and that allows them to either figure out what they're going to do, you know, with a financial planner like Karen or with a realtor like Joe, I think that they need to make what is in their best interest, their best decision, not what the child's best decision is for the child's future financial planning. So that's my little disclaimer for the 30, 40, and 50-year-old children that are trying to latch on to mom and dad. And I know it might be a little controversial. Some people see that that the parent ought to take care of the child. So I know that that's a little, it could be a little controversial with someone.
You know, the other issue I see quite a lot too, Suzanne, is that, you know, in today's day and age, we have a lot of blended families. Right, second marriages, third marriages, and people with children from previous relationships. And without the proper planning, what could often happen with homes and other assets is that whoever dies last wins. Meaning that, you know, if everything goes to your spouse upon your passing, and then when they pass, when the spouse passes, everything goes to their children, your children miss out. And so it's really, you know, and it's not, you have to really kind of think through, and one of the things we do as financial planners is to kind of follow the money, so to speak, as to when one person passes, when the second passes, how it all flows. And so this is something we do with estate attorneys as well, and this is where trusts are often used, so as to make sure that both sides of the family receive the money whenever, you know, when the second person passes. But with joint ownership, it's very easy with properties. You know, that often happens too, that if it's not addressed in a trust or in the will, for example, then and I've seen it happen quite frequently actually, that the descendants of the person who passed first don't receive any, and it wasn't the intent, and that's the sad part, is that they did not intentionally omit them, but that's just how, you know, the cookie crumbles, as they say.
Yeah, so I would think it's important to get the message out that if it is a second marriage, or maybe, well, if it is a second marriage, review everything, review your beneficiaries, review your will, have any of the wishes changed. How often do you think somebody should relook at their financial plan, like relook at everything?
Well, your financial plan, I think it's appropriate to look at, you know, annually, actually, because you want to have a good idea of the value of your assets, your spending habits, you know, how things are titled, because things do change, and you could inherit money, or, you know, support for kids or parents, you know, changes. Estate plans, you could go typically a little bit longer, 5 years, 7 years. There are a lot of ancillary documents. You know, an estate plan isn't just a will or a trust. It's also a power of attorney for your financial and legal affairs, a healthcare power of attorney. So you always want to make sure the people you've named in these different roles are still appropriate. But powers of attorney for financial and legal are often not honored by custodians or banks when they're stale. So when they're, you know, 7, 8, 10 years old, banks just won't honor them. So you really have to kind of update them, even though nothing's changed but the date. But if you're going to make sure they're still effective. So for those reasons, you know, we look at reviewing estate plans, you know, every 5 years or so, in financial plans, you know, your net worth and your overall spending. In tax situation, especially, you know, big tax change this year in 2018. So things change, markets change, laws change, taxes change. So the overall financial plan, I think, should be reviewed annually.
Got it. And I would think too, with you know, a maintenance plan with a house, sometimes I think as people get older, and maybe if it's a situation where maybe they weren't as good with their assets, do you encounter a lot of deferred maintenance?
Oh yeah, very much so. I mean, so much so that I've been in literally thousands of houses, that when going into a house, you can actually see and determine that, you know, why there are deferred maintenance issues. And you can almost, it's like a timeline. You're looking at what first went wrong, and then because that wasn't taken care of, then there's this problem and that problem all the way down the line. And it starts off with something as simple as cleaning out your gutters. If you don't clean out your gutters, you know, that can create lots of other problems. And the three enemies to a home are water, water, and water, whether it's in the form of ice, whether it's in the form of moisture like steam or liquid. You know, that can create lots of problems. And if you don't clean out your gutters or have adequate drainage, that creates problems. You can have, you know, water backing up with ice dam and coming down through your ceiling in the winter. You could have, when it rains heavy, the water overflows the gutter, goes down into the ground, and then seeps through the foundation into your basement. So, and then, okay, now it goes through the walls. We have moisture on woods, and now we have problems with mold. And then you have problems with mold. And so it's just one thing after another. And then if it goes long enough, then you start to have structural problems. So you can actually, it's like almost like an archaeological dig when you go into some of these houses, and you can see what went wrong and about how long ago it started. And usually it starts with something like, not trimming trees, letting trees grow over the house, literally.
Yeah.
The shrubs get too close to the foundation, so the water can't evaporate around the foundation, so it's always moist there. That creates problems, So it is, fortunate that happens, but it does happen. So if you can plan ahead and have someone, if it's a landscaper or, just some type of contingency for when things like that happen, to take care of the house, it will really help the home retain its value. It will also keep it more marketable, more attractive to prospective buyers, because of course, drive-by is so important. People see the picture of your house online and they go and they drive by, and if it doesn't look good and they see all of the water splashing down the side from where the gutters overflowed and trees overgrown, that can detract value from your house.
And I think sometimes an alternative for prospective clients of yours that maybe don't have the cash on hand or maybe don't want to liquidate their assets, not necessarily that they have to do another mortgage and refinance. Sometimes a very simple route is to take out an equity line. Some equity lines are relatively quick to get. I have a big network of professionals that I'll refer to that do equity lines, and sitting with somebody like you and saying, okay, well, that's $5,000 or maybe $10,000 that they're putting into the house may help them get so much more, because now the buyer is not picking the house apart so much, or going to another house, because it's not, getting the little rats in the head of, oh, okay, well, if this is wrong, then maybe that might be wrong or that might be wrong. And I'm sure you see that when you're listing houses.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the thing is, too, I mean, you want your house to sell as quickly as possible. And so if there's anything that you can do when preparing your house or when putting your house on the market, so that people don't, when they leave the house, say, okay, that was the house that had the smell of moisture in the basement. You don't want that to be the memory of your house. You want them to remember the positive aspects of your home. You don't want them to remember the water stains on the carpet or the smell of, pet urine or things like that. And these are things that are not uncommon in houses where you have senior citizens where things have started to slip.
Yeah.
Well, I just saw, I'm trying to refer, I just saw a statistic about that the number of Americans over age 85 is going to triple in 2050. So, we really have quite a lot of things to look forward to, I'll say. But, could you tell us a little bit about, Joe, about age 55 plus communities and kind of how those work and the differences between them? Because I know some, like, you own the land and some you don't own the land.
Well, if you can have 55 plus communities that are single family homes, you can also have them, and typically they're condominiums.
Okay.
Where in a condominium, you own your property from the studs in, and then everything else, the streets, the walks, the deck, everything on the outside, that's common area that's owned by the association. Okay. Now, 55 plus communities are good because if I'm a builder and I'm developing one and I go to the town and say, listen, I want to build this, can you give my homeowners who buy these properties a tax break? They're likely to do that because it's 55 plus. Typically, when you're over 55, you're not going to have children who would be going into the school system. Okay. So you're not going to demand as many services from the municipality. So they'll be able to lower the taxes on that property. And there are other incentives that can be negotiated as well, but that's a big one because if you don't have to put kids in school, okay, that's whatever it is, $10,000, $15,000 a year that they do not have to budget for going forward. Wow. So
interesting. Yeah. And so you've seen quite a lot of developments in southeastern Mass and Rhode Island.
Yeah, I think we probably should look to get more of them online. One of the problems that builders are having right now, not just for 55 plus, but in general, is there are so many regulations in place by municipalities. It's difficult to build a house that costs less than $350,000, $375,000, and for it to be profitable, worthwhile for the builder. So they build $375,000, $400,000 and up houses. Well, if you can only afford a $250,000 house or a condo, right, that's problematic. So we need to, if we can relax those regulations, it'll make it better for affordable the lower income home buyers, whether they're seniors, first-time home buyers. I mean, I work with a lot of folks who are not Native American. Okay, they come here from somewhere else and they're looking to buy their first home. and there's nothing out there. And
Yeah.
if it's like in that $150,000 price range, they're competing with flippers who pay cash.
Right.
You know, so the people who can literally least afford it are the ones who are, you know, getting kicked in the shins the hardest. So.
And I think it's important for, you know, maybe for people that are in the older age bracket, see if there are any tax benefits. Doesn't hurt to call town hall if you want to stay in your home and find out if you can get your taxes reduced because you're a senior citizen or you're a veteran.
Yeah, those are two good ones. Yeah.
Yes, prior to my mother moving, she lived in North Providence, and she got a senior citizen discount on her property taxes. And the other thing is to also check with, you know, any of the local services, any of the senior centers. A lot of times the senior centers are going to help to get you with other professionals that you can speak to that have been vetted out, that they trust, and that they can refer you to, who maybe can help with lower cost on the repairs.
Mm-hmm.
So many, you know, there are resources. Sometimes people don't know where to turn for those resources. For
Yeah,
sure.
there's definitely, you know, quite a lot of availability. I wouldn't say availability, but there's different options for senior housing.
Right.
That is based on your income. And, but you have to get your name on the list. You have to find the place you like, get your name on the list, and then.
And that's problematic
wait for it to
too,
come.
because sometimes I have clients, they have to wait like 2 years to
Yeah.
get on there, and now you have 90 days to move in.
Right.
So if you own a home, you have 90 days to basically get your home prepared to sell,
Yep.
put it on the market, get it closed, and then move into your assisted living or senior housing,
Right.
whatever it is. So that can be very problematic. But you know, that's just the way it is right now. So.
And that's, the rent is adjusted based on your income, and
Right.
it's usually about 30% of your income. So it is really the most, among the most affordable
Right.
ways to live. And then you have, you know, some options of 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, et cetera. But you have to really, you know, kind of hit the pavement, so to speak, and see the places.
Yeah.
And get your name in the place that you like the best.
Right.
And then wait it out.
Mm-hmm.
And another alternative for housing for seniors that I've seen that could work, you know, quite well for some people is the mobile home parks, which is probably a fancier name for them now, I would say. But when you walk into a home, they're gorgeous. You know, they're really, you know, pretty spacious, and they're not on wheels. They're planted there, and you know, but that is a more often a way for the people who are looking to spend, you know, $100,000 or less on a property. That's a very viable alternative. The caveat is that you don't own the land typically,
Right.
and you have to pay an additional fee for that. And similar to the HOA fee for condos, you know, that price can increase over the years.
And additionally, in most mobile home parks, your utilities are billed to you at a premium from mobile home park owner. So
Yeah.
if it's, you know, so much per kilowatt hour from National Grid, you're going to pay 10 to 15% on top of that,
Right.
just so it goes from the main pole to your trailer,
Yeah.
Wow.
to your mobile home.
Well, now that we bring up utilities too, that's also something to reach out to the utility company and see if there's a way to negotiate to get a type of senior discount. I think with just like relooking at financial plans, relook at everything, your car insurance, cable. You know, I'm finding that a lot of the older generation are becoming a little more tech savvy. If you have a smart TV, maybe it's time to get rid of cable. We're thinking about doing that personally,
Right.
because of the cost. So, you know, there are a lot of resources to maybe help you stay in the home, or look at some of the other alternatives, like getting your name on a list, as Karen suggested, or.
And one of the things too, with regard to utilities, I mean, in Rhode Island, we have Rhode Islanders Saving Energy Rise. You call them up, they will come into your home for free, replace all of your light bulbs with low energy bulbs, other fixtures they'll replace. That doesn't cost anything. And that can really, you can realize an instant savings on your electric bill from something like that. You know, air filters on your, if it's forced hot air, things like that. So this is a resource that's available. Everybody who pays an electric bill, a few dollars every month go into this, and that's how it's free for those folks who utilize it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
As we get ready to wrap up, I just want to make certain that I have you guys give out your contact information in case there are any additional questions. I'm not sure if we do have any right now, I can't see that far. So if there are any questions,
we'll make sure we answer them directly.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Karen, how would someone get a hold of you?
So my office is located on Jefferson Boulevard in Warwick, and I'm the president of a wealth management firm called Diversified Resources, and the firm has been there for 35 years, same location, same phone number, right next to Shogun Restaurant, and the number is 941-1500, and you could also email me at Karen, Karen, at divres.com. I usually don't sound this much like a frog. So
super. How about you, Joe?
My name is Joe Luca, and I work at RE/MAX Preferred. My telephone number is 401-580-9797. That's 580-9797. You can call or text me at that number. And my email is josephluca@remax.net. That's JOSEPHLUCA@remax.net. And you can reach out to me in whatever manner is easiest for you.
Thank you. And then I'm Suzanne Caldera, so it's Suzanne.Caldera@shamrockfinancial.com. So I'm the one with the long email, SUZANNE.CALDEIRA@shamrockfinancial.com. Direct line 401-228-9565. And any questions that you have for any of us, we're happy to answer them. We hope that you found today informative. Any comments, any feedback, we'd love to hear. Or if there was something that you thought maybe that we should have spoken about, we'd love to know as well. So in a moment, I'm going to get up, walk next to the computer, and shut this down. So we thank you today for taking the time. Be safe if we do get the snow that they're talking about. And again, thanks so much.